What if I told you that a single piece of paper, signed hundreds of miles away, kickstarted a chain of events that would lead to cowboys, cattle drives, and the Texas we know today? Well, that's exactly what happened in 1821, when Mexico finally won its independence from Spain. But this newfound freedom wasn't just about parades and fiestas in Mexico City. It was about to change everything for a dusty, nearly empty corner of their new nation called Texas. Get ready to travel back in time with us as we explore how this new chapter in Mexican history opened the floodgates for a wave of American settlers. If you're ready for a story filled with daring adventurers, big dreams, and the start of some serious culture clashes, then you've come to the right place. And if you want to make sure you don't miss a single moment of this incredible saga, go ahead and lasso that subscribe button and give this video a big, Texas-sized like. For 300 years, Spain had ruled Mexico with an iron fist. But by the early 1800s, the Mexican people were tired of being told what to do. They wanted to be their own boss. After a long and bloody war, Mexico finally told Spain, adios, and became an independent nation. This was a huge deal. But now, the new Mexican government had a whole new set of problems. One of their biggest headaches was Texas. It was a huge, sprawling territory with tons of natural resources, but hardly anyone lived there. The few folks who did were constantly dealing with raids from Native American tribes like the Comanche and Apache. The Mexican government knew they needed to get more people into Texas and fast. They needed settlers who could farm the land, build towns, and create a buffer zone to protect the rest of Mexico. But where would they find them? Enter the Empresario System. Now, empresario is just a fancy Spanish word for a land agent or a real estate developer. The Mexican government came up with a brilliant idea. They would offer huge chunks of land to these empresarios, who would then be responsible for bringing in new settlers. It was like a giant real estate deal. The empresarios got the land for free, and in return, they had to convince a certain number of families to move to Texas. These families would get their own piece of land at a super cheap price. We're talking pennies per acre. But there were a few catches. To get this sweet deal, the new settlers had to agree to 3 things. 1, they had to become Mexican citizens. 2, they had to convert to Catholicism. 3, they had to be of good moral character. Now, for a lot of American pioneers who were struggling to make a living back in the United States, this sounded like a dream come true. A chance to own their own land and build a new life? Sign them up. And that brings us to the most famous impresario of them all, Stephen F. Austin. This guy is so important, he's known as the father of Texas. Austin's dad, Moses Austin, was actually the first one to get permission from the Spanish government to bring settlers to Texas. But sadly, he died before he could make his dream a reality. On his deathbed, he begged his son to take over the project.
My son, you must carry on my work. Settle the families in Texas.
Stephen, being the good son that he was, agreed. He was a quiet, bookish man, a lawyer by trade, and not exactly the rough and tumble pioneer type. But he was incredibly smart, patient, and a great negotiator. When Mexico won its independence, Austin had to travel all the way to Mexico City to get his land grant reapproved by the new government. It was a long, dangerous journey, and he had to learn Spanish along the way. But he did it. He impressed the Mexican officials with his honesty and his determination. They gave him a huge piece of land between the Brazos and Colorado rivers, and he was cleared to bring in his first 300 families, who would go down in history as the Old 300. The Old 300 were the first wave of Anglo-American settlers to come to Texas under Austin's contract. These were tough, resourceful people who were willing to risk everything for a new life. Life on the Texas frontier was no picnic. They had to build their own homes, clear the land for farming, and deal with all sorts of challenges, from floods and droughts to disease and attacks from Native American tribes. But they were a resilient bunch. They built communities, started farms, and laid the foundation for what would become the state of Texas. And at the heart of it all was Stephen F. Austin, working tirelessly to make his colony a success. Austin was more than just a land agent. He was a leader, a diplomat, and a father figure to his colonists. He helped them settle disputes, wrote laws for the colony, and represented their interests to the Mexican government. Austin was the most famous, but he wasn't the only impresario in town. Other ambitious men also saw the potential in Texas and got their own land grants. Green DeWitt was another American impresario who founded a colony to the west of Austin's. His main town was Gonzales, which would later become famous for a certain cannon. But that's a story for another time. And then there was Martín de León, a Mexican impresario who founded the town of Victoria. His colony was unique because it was the only one that was primarily settled by Mexican families. Thanks to these impresarios, the population of Texas exploded. By the early 1830s, there were tens of thousands of American settlers in Texas, and they were quickly outnumbering the Tejanos, or Texans of Mexican descent. Now, you might be thinking, this all sounds great. Everyone's getting along, right? Well, not exactly. All this rapid growth and cultural mixing was starting to cause some problems. Remember those 3 rules the settlers had to follow? Become Mexican citizens, convert to Catholicism, and be of good moral character? The good moral character part was a bit of a mixed bag. While most of the settlers were honest, hard-working folks, Texas also became a magnet for scoundrels, outlaws, and people who were just trying to escape their problems back in the US. As for becoming Mexican citizens, most of the settlers did it on paper, but in their hearts they still felt like Americans. They continued to speak English, follow American customs, and they didn't really feel much loyalty to Mexico. And the biggest issue of all? Religion. Most of the American settlers were Protestants, and they were not exactly thrilled about having to convert to Catholicism. While the Mexican government didn't strictly enforce this rule at first, it was a constant source of tension. Another major point of conflict was slavery. Many of the American settlers, especially those from the southern states, brought enslaved people with them to work their cotton farms. But slavery was illegal in Mexico. The settlers found a loophole by calling their enslaved workers indentured servants, but the Mexican government was not happy about it. This issue would become a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. So, by 1825, the stage was set for some major drama. On one hand, you had the new and ambitious nation of Mexico, trying to build a stable and prosperous country. And on the other hand, you had a flood of independent-minded American settlers who were bringing their own language, their own religion, and their own ideas about how things should be done. While the Mexican national period started with a lot of promise and opportunity, it also planted the seeds of misunderstanding and conflict that would soon grow into a full-blown revolution. What will happen when these two very different cultures clash? How will the Mexican government react to the growing independence of the Texas colonists? And what will finally push these settlers to take up arms against their adopted country? You'll have to join us for part 2 of our series to find out. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of this epic Texas tale. Now, for our question of the day. The Old 300 were some of the bravest and most adventurous families in American history. We want to know, what's the most adventurous thing your family has ever done? Share your stories in the comments below. We can't wait to read them. Until next time, stay curious, and remember that history is more than just dates and names. It's the story of us.